In 1804, the Lewis and Clark expedition set off to explore the newly purchased lands to the west, with the mandate to explore the land and record what they saw. By the end of 1805, they reached the mighty Pacific Ocean, arriving in the northwest of the modern-day United States. The mildly cold but violently stormy region took its toll on the men of the expedition. After crossing over 4,100 miles of the Pacific Ocean, the expedition had to travel across the same distance and face the same obstacles to return home, but now with less provisions. As spring approached, the Corps of Discovery, led by Lewis and Clark, including the Pennsylvania Carpenter and frontiersman Sergeant Patrick Gass, was on the move to go home. They left behind the rainy shores of the Pacific Northwest to trek back to the western foot of the Rocky Mountains. Spring may have came to the flatlands of the Pacific Northwest, but it was still winter in the mountains. On the other side of those mountains were provisions they left behind, such as gunpowder, food, salt, medicine, and their boats to get this group of 33 back to civilization. Despite the hardship and the dangers, Patrick Gass and his fellow soldiers were still tasked to explore, and that is what they intended to do the whole way back to St. Louis. To start their journey back home, the Lewis and Clark expedition had to travel back up the Columbia River. Due to snowmelt off the Rocky Mountains, the Columbia River's water was very high, making their travels difficult as the swollen river tried to push the Corps back towards the Pacific Ocean. Adding to the difficulty was illness among the men, constant attempts by the local natives to steal their equipment, and damaged canoes due to the rough waters that they were experiencing. They also were having trouble at times finding food to feed the men, so they once again traded local tribes for dogs. Due to the rough and swollen Columbia, the party abandoned their canoes and then burnt them in spite of the local populations for their attempt to steal all of their stuff. The captains then purchased horses to travel overland to the prairies of the Nez Perce. In that prairie land, the Corps planned to recover their pack horses that they left there previously with those people the previous fall. The sore-footed men finally arrived at the territory of the Nez Perce, the friendly natives that greeted them last fall while they suffered weakness from their trek across the mountains. They recovered the majority of their horses and their pack saddles, but bad news was to be had by these homesick men of the Corps. The Nez Perce informed them, according to Gass, that we could not cross the mountains for a moon and a half as the snow was too deep and no grass for our horses to subsist on. In mid-May, it was determined that they would have to wait nearly a month before they could safely cross the mountains. In a hurry to get home, Mother Nature decided to stop their advance. Forced to stay with the Nez Perce, Patrick Gass got to observe the native peoples. The natives stayed all day at our camp, and one of them had round his neck a scalp of an Indian with 6 thumbs and 4 fingers of other Indians he had killed in battle, of the Shoshone, or Snake Nation. These nations have been long at war and destroyed a great many of each other in a few years past. The arms of the Indians are generally bows and arrows and the war mallet. The war mallet is a club with a large head of wood or stone. Those of stone are generally covered with leather and fastened to the end of the club with thongs or straps of leather in the sinews of animals. During their stay with the Nez Perce, Lewis and Clark worked as physicians to help with different illnesses and ailments of the local people, despite their war against Sacagawea's people, the Shoshone. Throughout early June, Gass and the Corps kept an eye on the river levels. During the night, the water would swell in the Clearwater River, but would go down during the day. Gass notes that this is from the snow melting on the mountain during the heat of the day, and the water from the melted snow would reach their camp at night. Finally, on June 15th, the Corps decided to leave and to try to cross the mountains. As they ascended the large rocky hills, they found a 3-foot deep blanket of snow covering the ground, with some areas being 15 feet deep. Realizing how dangerous it was to cross this area without food to graze their horses and a guide, they left a lot of their baggage and they dropped back off the mountains. Gans described the men at this time as melancholy and disappointed. After securing some native guides, the Corps once again started over the mountains, and Gass said that they marched over packed snow, in which he said the horses generally do not sink more than 3 inches in the snow, but sometimes they break through to their bellies. He also said they proceeded over some of the steepest mountains I ever passed, and he commented, "But it appears to me somewhat extraordinary to be traveling over snow 6 or 8 feet deep in the latter end of June." The Corps crossed this part of the Rockies through the same pass that they used the previous fall, the Lolo Pass. Food was scarce, but Gass said that they had to stick to the south side of the ridges where summer seemed to live, as the north and less sunny side of the ridge was actually covered in snow and still engulfed in winter. In June, on June 29th, they camped at the Lolo Hot Spring, and many of the men bathed in it to thaw out from the winter. On June 30th, they were out of the high mountains and rested at Traveler's Rest, where they rested for 2 days back in September. It was here that a big decision was made. Lewis and Clark were going to split the Corps of Discovery. The scientific Lewis would take a small party of men, including Patrick Gass, straight across the prairie and mountains to the Great Falls of the Missouri River. This would be a quicker route to their cache of equipment and pirogues that were located there. And with the extra time, Lewis planned to lead a small party up the Marias River to explore another water path to the west. The map-making Clark would lead the rest of the Corps on a similar path they took through the mountain valley to travel to the Pacific. This backtracking would bring them to the headwaters of the Missouri River. Now, at the headwaters, the Corps would gather their cache of equipment that they had stored there and float it down the Missouri River to Great Falls to meet Lewis's team. But Clark and a small group would travel to the Yellowstone River and travel down it to its mouth on the Missouri. At the Yellowstone's mouth, Clark's team would rendezvous with Lewis and the rest of the Corps of Discovery. Sacagawea, her husband Charbonneau, and her child Jean-Baptiste would travel with Clark down the Yellowstone River. After bidding goodbye to many of his comrades at Traveler's Rest, Patrick Gass took control of a few horses and began his journey with Lewis's team on the short path to Great Falls. Traveling up what is called Clark's Fork today, and then traveling up the Blackfoot River, Gass notes many handsome prairies as they traveled. They reached the Continental Divide on July 7th near where the town of Lincoln, Montana is today. They were now in the lands where all waterways led to the Missouri River. Once they were out of the mountains, the small group traveled across a flat and beautiful plain and arrived at Sun River near Sims, Montana. The river was calm, and Lewis notes that the prickly pear cactuses were in bloom. But danger lurked on the beautiful plains. As Gass and Thompson were escorting horses forward, they were chased by one of the notorious grizzly bears. Gass and Thompson were mounted on horseback and took off and successfully outran their foe. They told Lewis they were afraid to fire at the beast for fear that their horses, unused to the firing of a gun, would throw them to the ground and leave them to their own devices against the horrible bear of the West. On July 12th, Lewis and Gass's team reached the Missouri and arrived at the old camp just upriver from the falls. They began to open up their caches left there the previous year and checked on the white pirogue they left below the falls on the other side of their portage location. Some materials in the caches were spoiled, which was an unfortunate event, but extra irritating to Lewis, who lost some important scientific information. A man was sent to check on the white pirogue, and he ran into some trouble. A grizzly bear spooked his horse, which throwed Mr. McNeil onto the ground, and then the horse bolted for its own safety. Upon gaining his senses, McNeil realized he was thrown to the ground right next to the bear. Being too close to fire his gun upon the bear, McNeil broke his gun over the head of the bear, and he ran. The blow so disoriented the bear that McNeil had enough time to scurry up a tree for safety. For 3 hours, the bear watched McNeil sitting in the tree until finally it left its prey alone so the man could climb down and chase down his horse that bolted. McNeil returned to camp without successfully reaching the pirogue. Gass later adventured to the lower portage camp and found the white pirogue safe and sound and ready for its service to float them down the Missouri River and back home. On July 16th, Captain Lewis, with 3 other men, left to travel up the Marias River, leaving Gass in charge of the rest of the Corps at the upper portage camp. Gass's job was to repair the wagons that would be used to transport the canoes overland to below the Great Falls so the Corps could continue their journey home on the Missouri River. Soon, men from Clark's party would arrive from the 3 forks of the Missouri with canoes and baggage that would require this overland transport. In absence of their captains, Sergeant Patrick Gass was now in charge of the Corps of Discovery. Gass wrote of his orders regarding Lewis's side quest. When Captain Lewis left us, he gave orders that we should wait at the mouth of Marias River to the 1st of September, at which time, should he not arrive, we were to proceed on and join Captain Clark at the mouth of the Yellowstone River, and then to return home, but informed us that should his life and health be preserved, he would meet us at the mouth of the Marias River on the 5th of August. On July 19th, the men and canoes and baggage from the mouth of the Missouri arrived at the upper camp. Within days, Gass and his men were beginning to move the baggage and canoes via their wagons to the lower end of the falls. By July 27th, the majority of the Corps of Discovery were on the water while Gass traveled overland to the mouth of the Marias River. Gass planned to rendezvous with Lewis when he returned in 9 days. The next day, Gass arrived at the mouth of the Marias before the men in the pirogues and the canoes. To his surprise, Captain Lewis and his party accompanied the canoes downriver 8 days before Gass expected his commanding officer to actually arrive. Lewis recounted his experience up the Marias River to the sergeant. Lewis and his 3 men, Droillard and brothers Joseph and Reuben Field, met with 8 young Blackfeet natives on July 26th, in which they had a smoke and a conversation. That night, Lewis and his men camped with the young Blackfeet. Lewis had first watch, but he awoken Joseph Field to finish the night watch and keep an eye on the natives. At dawn, the Blackfeet awoke and stole the guns of the men and their horses while Joseph fell asleep on duty. Lewis awoke to Droillard's yelling, "Damn you, let go of my gun," as he wrestled with one of the Blackfeet. The Field brothers ran after a native in which they struggled for their own guns. In the melee, Reuben stabbed a young Blackfeet through the heart, killing the native. Lewis reached for his gun when he noticed it wasn't there, and he spotted another warrior running off with it. He pulled his pistol and ordered the Blackfeet to drop his gun, which he did, and he walked slowly away. With their arms regained, Lewis and the men confronted the Blackfeet as they attempted to drive their horses away, warning the natives that he would kill them if they would not give back his horses. Lewis fired at one of them, striking him in the belly. As the Blackfeet fell to his knees, he fired at Lewis, in which the bullet whizzed by Lewis's head. The young Blackfeet died shortly afterwards. Lewis recovered the horses, gathered up their supplies, and out of fear of a counterattack, he hightailed it to the Missouri River, where he knew that backup awaited. Riding over 100 miles in 24 hours, the fatigued and sore Lewis and his men arrived at the mouth of the Marias River to tell the tale to Gass. At the mouth of the Marias River, the Corps dug up the cache that they left there on the island, finding many things damaged by water and cave-ins. Also damaged was the red pirogue that they left there the year before. It was rotted and was not worthy of traveling down the river. They quickly removed the nails from the damaged boat, and they set off down the Missouri with one pirogue in their canoes, leaving many of their horses behind. They now had a straight shot down the Missouri and back home. In the beginning of August 1806, Gass and Lewis and the majority of the Corps of Discovery was traveling swiftly down the Missouri River. Compared to the previous year, which saw them struggling against the current to go upriver, traveling downriver was a lot easier and faster. Under the scientific mind of Lewis, the Corps was killing animals such as bighorn sheep and bear and buffalo for not just food, but for skins and skeletons to preserve and carry downriver to be given to President Jefferson in Washington. By August 7th, the Corps traveled around 450 miles from Marias River to the mouth of the Yellowstone River in just 10 days. This was the place in which they were to rendezvous with Captain Clark and company. When they arrived, the only sign they found of William Clark, Sacagawea, and the company that was with them was a note written in the sand saying, WC a few miles further down the right-hand side. As the Corps advanced down the river, they would find recently left camps of Captain Clark, but no captain as he continued eastward home. Before catching up to Captain Clark, the High Alert Corps went on an elk hunting mission that ended absolutely catastrophically. Lewis and a man named Cruzat went out together to hunt elk. Lewis was in brown leather and blended in well among the thick willow when a report of a gun was heard and a bullet penetrated his left thigh about an inch below his hip joint. Thinking his own man had thought that he was an elk, Lewis yelled out to Cruzat, "Damn you, you've shot me!" With no answer from Cruzat, Lewis then was convinced of a Native American attack and began limping his way back to the river. Lewis ordered the men to prepare for attack and sent Sergeant Gass and 3 men to inspect the site in which he was shot to look for signs of Indians. Gass and his party found no signs of Indians, but they did find Cruzat, who relayed to Gass that it was he who shot Lewis by mistake, being of bad vision and thinking that Lewis was an elk in the bushes. Scared, poor Cruzat did not respond to Lewis right away, leading to the fear of Indian attack. Returning to the boats, Gass found Lewis prepared for battle with his pistol, rifle, and his famed air gun ready to defend his life to the end if need be. With the help of Patrick Gass, Lewis removed his clothes and dressed his own wound, finding the bullet lodged in his leather pants after passing through the rear part of his upper thigh, missing the bone and artery. The next day, August the 12th, the Corps finally caught up to Captain Clark's group. Gass wrote, "Now, thanks to God, we are all together again in good health, except Captain Lewis, and his wound is not serious." In a few short days, the Corps was back in Mantan territory, where they were greeted by old friends and said goodbye to fellow travelers. John Coulter, who had traveled with the Corps these past 2 years, asked for an honorable discharge from the U.S. military to go with some hunters to explore what we now call Yellowstone National Park today. Lewis and Clark granted him that discharge. Also bidding adieu to the Corps was Charbonneau, his wife Sacagawea, and the youngest member, the 18-month-old son of those two, Jean-Baptiste. After lashing some of the smaller canoes together to make them more stable on the wider Missouri River, the Corps left the Mandans for the United States. With the strong downstream current, the Lewis and Clark expedition was heading home at a pace of 50 to 60 miles per day. Even with Lewis reclined in the boats as his body healed from his wound, he still commanded the scientific part of this expedition. With the Corps getting closer to known lands, Lewis ordered the hunting of sheep and mule deer to take specimens of their bones and hides back to Washington, which the Corps stopped to hunt and process these hides. They also stopped to pay respects to the only man lost on this expedition. Sergeant Floyd's grave in modern Sioux City, Iowa, was visited by many of the Corps, in which they covered his grave again as it was disturbed by local native peoples. As they inched closer to St. Louis, the Corps ran into riverboatmen and traders carrying goods. They would trade and purchase corn, flour, and whiskey, items they had not seen in a very long time. In fact, liquor was a stranger to them since July 4th, 1805. On September 12th, the Corps of Discovery met Robert McClellan and his crew, who was going up the Missouri to trade with local tribes. Both Lewis and Clark were well acquainted with McClellan, as they were all military men during the Indian Wars a decade previously. Robert McClellan was very similar to Patrick Gass. Born and raised near Mercersburg, Pennsylvania, he was an adventurer, soldier, frontiersman, and pack horse driver. McClellan would eventually help lead another expedition into the West, much like Lewis and Clark, but to less success. It was McClellan who informed the Corps of news from the United States, news that none of the members of the Corps of Discovery heard in over 2 years. With gun salutes and many shaking hands, the Corps of Discovery arrived in St. Louis on September 23, 1806, after covering more than 8,000 miles. Sergeant Patrick Gass's last entrance in his journal states, "The 19th was a fine day, and at daylight we continued our voyage past the mouth of Mine River, saw several turkeys on the shores, but did not delay a moment to hunt, being so anxious to reach St. Louis, where, without any important occurrence, we arrived on the 23rd and were received with great kindness and marks of friendship by the inhabitants, after an absence of 2 years, 4 months, and 10 days. Gass returned with Lewis to Washington after the expedition. Then he returned to his home in Wellsburg, Virginia, which is now in West Virginia, in 1806. Despite Lewis's want to be the first of the expedition to publish a book on their adventures, Gass decided to publish his journal anyhow, despite what his commanding officer might say. Gass acquired the services of an Irish schoolmaster, Mr. McKeon, to help edit his journal and publish it. The result was a 262-page book that was published in Pittsburgh in 1807, being the first published work released to excited readers about the expedition, and the primary source for this research that I'm presenting today. This angered Lewis, who denounced Patrick Gass's journal, and he warned people against it. Lewis issued a letter to the public to put them on their guard with respect to such publications, lest from the practice of such impositions they may be taught to depreciate the worth of the work in which I am myself preparing for publication before it can possibly appear. The book Lewis wanted to publish never made it to print before he supposedly committed suicide in 1809. A version of it was published after his death 7 years after Gass's book in 1814. After publishing his journal, Patrick Gass found himself working in the lead trade up and down the Mississippi and into the Nashville area of Tennessee. When problems arose with the Southern Indians, Gass was drafted into the force that was to confront them under the command of General Andrew Jackson. Not wanting to go to war with Native Americans, Gass chose to join the regular army under General Gaines, and he marched north to the frontiers of Illinois. 1813 found Gass stationed in Illinois, guarding the frontier from Native American forces that were being employed by the British to harass the borders of the United States during the War of 1812. While stationed on the frontier, Patrick Gass suffered an injury, not from battle, but from chopping wood. A splinter of wood flew up and hit him, causing him to lose an eye. With his injury, Gass was deemed unfit for service during the winter of 1813 and 1814. In the spring, though, Gass's corps was ordered to Pittsburgh, so they loaded on the boats and traveled down the Illinois River to the Mississippi, and then up the Ohio River, arriving in Pittsburgh in July. They soon marched north as the United States invaded Canada to land a blow against Britain in British-controlled territory. Gass crossed the Niagara River and found himself engaged in battle next to the great cataract of that river, Niagara Falls. On July 25, 1814, the British held the high ground near a red church along Lundy's Lane in what is now the city of Niagara Falls, Ontario. In the cemetery sat a battery of British artillery that rained hell upon the American forces trying to dislodge the British from their position. Gass was serving with the 21st U.S. Infantry, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel James Miller. 300 yards away sat the great falls of the Niagara, which Gass recalled roared with a great thunder and mixed with the thunder of artillery, musketry, and other noises of war. The British artillery, looking down on the Americans, was extra devastating to the American forces, and they had to be eliminated. When General Brown ordered Colonel Miller to capture the British guns, he responded, "I'll try, sir." While the British were distracted by an American attack on their right, the 21st U.S. Infantry with Patrick Gass snuck up on the artillery position and opened fire. The initial musket fire from the Americans killed most of the artillerymen. They were then ordered to charge with bayonets and seize the position. What British soldiers that was left at the guns were either dead to ball and bayonet or ran away in disarray. Immediately after capturing the high ground, the British infantry stationed behind the guns counterattacked the position. Gass and the 21st formed up on their new position and began to fire at the advancing troops, repulsing their advance. Eventually turning the British guns onto their enemy, the Americans were able to repulse them at least 3 times. This was some of the fiercest fighting seen that day, as the American line refused to give up its position and captured guns. The dead were piled in heaps as the British charged the American line, eventually resulting in more hand-to-hand combat and bayonet fighting. Men in blue and men in red mixed together in those heaps. By midnight, the American line only consisted of around 700 men, and both sides were weakened to exhaustion. Despite many dead and wounded men, Patrick Gass only suffered a bullet hole in his hat due to his short stature. Lacking water and supplies, the Americans retreated from the field as the constant roar of the falls finally replaced the roar of battle along the dangerous Niagara River. Before leaving the field, Patrick Gass assisted in rendering the captured British guns inoperative. He was given rat-tail files and a hammer to drive into the fuse hole on the back of the cannon so it could not be lit and fired. Gass recalled destroying a 24-pounder in which he drove in the rat-tail file and hammered it home, while some tall Yankees from York State knocked off the trunnions with a sledgehammer. The British would never fire that cannon again. The Battle of Lundy's Lane saw a strategic retreat of the American forces as they suffered 174 killed, 572 wounded, 79 captured, and 28 missing. The British suffered 84 killed, 559 wounded, 169 captured, and 55 missing. With peace reached, Patrick Gass was discharged from service in June 1815. After his discharge from the military, Patrick Gass traveled across the lake, walked, and then rode in a wagon to Pittsburgh. He then took a boat down the Ohio to Wellsburg to come home to his friends and his father. To tame his feral lifestyle, Gass tried his hands at various occupations. He ran a ferry, tended a brewery, used his carpenter skills to build a Baptist meeting house. He hunted stray horses in Ohio and labored on his father's farm and fulling mill, working with cloth to be used in clothes making. His father passed away in 1827, leaving a small estate in which Gass only got a small portion of it. With little excitement in his life and little money in his pocket and a lot of body aches from serving his country, Patrick Gass gave into intemperance and he began to drink heavily. In 1829, at the age of 58, Patrick Gass boarded at the house of Judge John Hamilton. Here is where the old soldier met Maria Hamilton, the judge's younger daughter. In 1831, Patrick and Maria were married. He was 59 and she was 20. Maria bore Patrick 7 children, with 1 dying in infancy. The old soldier settled on a small rocky piece of land that he farmed to raise his large family. Patrick Gass was living a happy life when disaster struck in 1846. The cold of February brought an outbreak of measles that affected all of Patrick's children and his dear wife. Though the children were able to fight it, Maria could not. His wife died at the age of 35, leaving Patrick a widower with 6 children, all under the age of 15 years old. Patrick himself was 76. For his services in the military, Patrick Gass received a 160-acre land grant in 1816, but lost it due to unpaid taxes. He lived off of a military pension of $96 per year. The great adventurer was impoverished. Despite this, however, his biographer in 1858 said, with the pittance of $96 a year, which he has been for many years in the habit of drawing in half-yearly installments from the agent of the government at Wheeling, and the small amount he has been enabled to eke from his spot of stony land, he has lived in patriarchal simplicity, owing no man anything, and apparently contented and happy as a millionaire. Remembering his old acquaintance in Mercersburg, Pennsylvania, as he worked as a carpenter in that town, Patrick Gass lived to see James Buchanan become President of the United States. He even voted for him. And this pyramid is what marks the birthplace of President James Buchanan out here on the outskirts of Mercersburg and Cove Gap. The old soldier, Patrick Gass, lived to see the beginning of the American Civil War as the southern states seceded from the Union. There is a record of Patrick Gass at the age of 91 arriving at a recruiting station ready and willing to join the Union Army to help fight the Southern rebels. That same record also said that the old soldier had to be forcibly removed from the recruiting station after they refused to take him once again into the services of his country. Obviously, Patrick Gass passionately protested the fact that he was viewed as too old to serve as a soldier in this new war. Gass eventually died on April 2nd, 1870. He was the last living member of the Lewis and Clark expedition, dying at the age of 98 with only 2 months to go to his 99th birthday. The hero of this story is buried with his wife in Brook Cemetery, Wellsburg, West Virginia. Patrick Gass was an extraordinary character in American history. He lived to see 4 major American wars, participated in one of them, and was involved in one of the most well-known transcontinental crossings of North America. The man that crisscrossed the American West lived to see the creation of the Transcontinental Railroad that linked the Pacific coast to the American lands on the East Coast. What took Patrick Gass in his youth a year and a half to achieve through hard work and determination only took 10 days on board a train car pulled by a steam locomotive at the time of Patrick's death. The world changed around Patrick Gass, but the spirit of adventure and patriotism continued in his heart until the end of his days. The one constant that has advanced America and the world even into today, it was the same adventure and patriotism that Patrick Gass had that also powered the Industrial Revolution, flew the first airplane, won 2 world wars, took man to space, explored the surface of the moon, and launched modern technology. Patrick Gass is only one example of the spirit of America that has powered this nation for 250 years. Let's pray that the future will produce more men and women who emanate the same principles as our forefathers and foremothers, including the men and women of the Lewis and Clark expedition, and of course, Sergeant Patrick Gass. Thank you for watching this video. This one was long, but this was the only way that I could do a man like Patrick Gass justice. Please see my sources below. If you like what you saw here on these videos, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Remember, these stories are ours, and it is our duty to keep these stories alive. See you next time as I explore What in the History.